fun dealing with Zoom recordings. I've had my
Every
share
time
of
I
it.
figure it out, then I don't have to do it for a while.
That's great that it goes right to your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Trying to think if I should sit here or there. I think that'll be easier for me to type and look at everyone.
Okay.
Over there.
Yeah, whatever works for you.
This is my special ergonomic keyboard.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
Now, we need to have Lincoln for a forum, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
Not for a quorum.
Well, there's,
Well, wait a minute, there's
There's
five of us and there's 3 here. Isn't that
right, so
right?
I think we're a forum, we need
I was
a,
gonna say technically, there's only 4 of you, actually.
so
Yeah,
it's 3 of
technically, there's
us.
only 4 of us, and so it doesn't matter if you
It
have.
doesn't matter.
That's why I was worried.
But even 5, we still have, there
Here's
she
Lynn.
is.
Yay.
Yay.
You see majority for
No
quorum.
problem.
Michelle caught me outside and I haven't seen her for a month, so.
Ah.
No, we have to have 4, and we're doing this 4, since the mayor is not a voting member, unless it's a tiebreaker. It's 4 trustees. Right, so, but then I always get confused when it comes to planning.
Yeah. And then there's the-
And then zoning board, we have 3 people, but nothing.
Yeah.
Come on up here. Join the crowd.
Yeah.
Steve's online, so if you want to sit close to us here in the front.
Yeah.
that's fine too.
And then just a friendly reminder that if everybody.
Molly.
Time Steve will not get there.
Really good.
Okay.
That's okay.
How does it,
Yeah, I
there's the
understand.
chat.
Oh, man.
It does, the owls, yep, the owls.
Hey, buddies.
When you turn them on, they're very good. I like it a lot.
Colorado should be here in a minute.
Okay.
So we don't have a chair to call this meeting to order.
So we need.
So could we do that unanimously? We call this meeting to order.
Order.
All in favor?
Aye.
Now you need a second.
First thing we should do is get a chair.
Yeah,
So,
well, we need to do roll call and then go to chair.
I didn't put that on because I figured you guys would want to wait until. I didn't.
Well, we need somebody to run the meeting.
I just got it. That was kind of, oops.
that's okay.
Sorry.
So roll call?
Yeah.
Are you ready for roll call?
Yeah.
Sure. Go ahead.
Mayor Bodnar,
Here.
Steve Doucette,
Here.
Lynn Howe, here. Dave Knudsen,
Here,
You have a form.
thank you.
Okay, so somebody, just somebody,
Why don't I run a meeting?
please go for it, Dave. Thank you, Dave.
So basically,
Approval of the agenda.
okay, let's look at the agenda and
Yeah,
do I have
approve
a
the
motion to
minutes.
approve the agenda?
No.
Approve the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Is there any discussion from members of the public or from commissioners? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that motion passes. So the, I can call it up. Thank you. The update and discussion of key issues from community engagement session. from Phoenix Rising. Do we have minutes?
I don't know.
There's none in the packet.
I didn't see any in the packet.
We're okay.
Thank you. So, does everyone have a copy of the Deer County Area Planning Commission letter in front of them?
1 second.
Steve, do you have that document?
I can pull it up.
Okay. Because I'm assuming that's what we'll be working off of.
Yeah.
You can sit up here, Christina. This isn't a like super formal thing. You don't have
Yeah,
to sit back.
We're doing really.
Yeah, grab a chair
today.
here. Yeah.
Is this gonna be, put on YouTube?
Yeah. of
It
course.
already is.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Come on up.
Have a seat at the table.
See what it's like, see what the view's like from this. end.
It's awesome.
Just
Thanks.
saying from experience.
All right,
Oh, and here's Suzanne too.
okay.
There's another seat up here, Suzanne, if you want to sit at the table.
It's easier to hear.
It's easier to hear. Okay, come on up.
Oh, you're Miss Christina. I did recognize you under that hat.
So all we've done is call the meeting to order. Do both of you have copies of the Town of Hamilton Planning Commission letter for Phoenix Rising? So you can look at it, because that's what we're gonna go through.
Right,
Okay,
those 8 points, yeah.
yeah, okay, cool.
Did you guys want to give me an update before we go through that?
I think maybe just to say that our next session on June 24th is going to be focusing on some of the key tensions, some of the things that came out of that first session that we realized we really need to build more common ground around. Mara, our teammate, framed it in a really nice way. Like, people see some of these issues as very wide extremes, and how can we kind of just get to a few options that will, the compromise basically, that will work for folks. Do you feel like I'm articulating that in a good way?
Yeah, I think it's that some of these tensions do feel very oppositional, but sometimes they actually exist within us as individuals. And that we all have this desire to move forward. We have to kind of find a way between these two that gets us to a path forward between those two extremes. Or many, there's several items in here, and they don't necessarily need to be conflict. They're just, how do we bridge the gap?
And so this conversation tonight is going to inform the way we frame the conversations on the 24th. We're still refining that. And I think one of the pieces, so Molly and I met with you all in, I believe, April, that was, and asked about some of these issues, and we got great input, but it was a lot of like individuals expressing their personal ideas and opinions. And we'd like to get closer to more like formal guidance from the Planning Commission on some of these areas.
So is it helpful if we do a formal motion and vote and just do it that way, or like one meeting in a way for some of your answers?
If we could get there.
Yeah, and so it might be, some of these might be a place where we can find some clear direction like that. And others might be just how we form the questions to kind of call that out.
Can I interject a general thing that I thought about after that meeting that we had? Is that I think one of the problems, or at least an understanding that might help people to engage in it slightly differently, is seeing this as a kind of like a business plan, right? Rather than, because specifics is sort of what threw things, and it was great that folks put out their information that was important to them, and that was certainly something that we were trying to figure out. But I think that because Molly, you and I in particular in our group was we were kind of figuring out, well, how do you get to a plan from this, when everybody's so focused on their individual desire, rather than the general kind of conditions for people to approach this in a way that's, like I said, it's more like a business plan and business planning rather than a specific set of individual personal goals. Does that make any sense the way I'm saying that?
Somewhat. I think what I'm a little confused about, Steve, is being clear about where the policy is set. Is it, like a lot of the questions in this document are asking us to kind of make decisions about what direction we think is the best way to go. Reading it that way. Of course, the board is going to change over in April, so there will be some changes in how people are looking at things. So I'm wondering if the guidance document might better serve the community by mapping out, here's a framework of decisions, and here's recommendations, like a preferred recommendation, and then.
Right. And I guess that's kind of what I'm saying,
Okay.
in the way that I'm just not explaining it correctly, I guess. So.
Good.
Yeah, our our task is to create the guidebook, not the policy.
Right.
But to have enough clear direction that when the policy needs to be made, we can look back at this document and say, well, when this was created, the community clearly showed us the path.
Yeah.
Said this is what they want, where and when. Yeah,
If on some of those issues, we actually get to that, that'll be the question.
right. And master plans can be varying levels of specificity. And an appropriate plan for Paonia might not be super specific.
Yeah.
It can be just a clear guidance.
Well, I wanted to reiterate some of the principles we're working with the housing, affordable housing group. You know, our principles were no surprises, and this is more about communication back and forth between the groups, that there's coordination, and coordination really implies, that's one of your questions, actually, is how do we coordinate with the affordable housing? How do we incorporate that in the plan? How do we incorporate the family emotion? Not too many times to the well, and that was a concern, because we have two planning efforts going simultaneously. And you're having your sessions, and affordable housing is in there, so there's a little concern there about too many times to the well. Don't reinvent the wheel, so there was a lot of things that were done, especially Paonia in Motion is a good example of that. You don't have to reinvent that, but one thing that has been tough for the community is reading the 134-page plan and trying to make sense out of it. There's been no executive summary. That would serve us really well with that.
Well, we have specifics that we don't want.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
34 pages is what we have specified for this
Yeah.
plan, so it can't.
There will be no ice skating. Be realistic and keep it simple. So one of the things is, you know, we're a town of 1,600 people. Do we need a 200?
47.
1,600, some people. When the tourists are here. So we consider them citizens. So anyway, I just wanted to reiterate those principles, and I wanted to point out, now this is my own opinion, that a plan should be something that's a document that we can use, that isn't this huge, giant thing that is almost undecipherable. And I felt that way with Paonia in Motion, to be frank. So I'll shut up and we'll go.
You know, as far as a public process, I think one of the wonderful things about the Heart and Soul Project is they look at the underlying goals, the underlying, what is driving us forward in this, and maybe that is the way to address this, is look at, you know, where we're coming from.
Yeah.
And because of that, then what do we do?
The tensions in particular.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that was the,
Values, that's what I was saying. What are our values? Because of that values, what are we looking for?
Marion is
That's where
going,
we go.
we have to speak up so we can be heard. And so, you know, I have hearing aids, Lynn doesn't.
I forgot.
Yeah, so
Okay.
let's be sure to speak up. So why don't we go point by point with that one for you guys?
Yeah, I was thinking, yeah, so use the values as the underlying driver to get to the, way to bridge the tensions. If we can find shared values and we can find ways to bridge tensions.
Yeah, and that is how we're thinking about framing these conversations. We feel like we have some pretty good values that came out of Heart and Soul, and then we worked on them at the last community engagement session. The values feel pretty solid, so we're thinking with each of these tensions, we will bring forward the related values to help frame those conversations.
we also plan to lead with a bit more education on the 24th. With, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're kind of educating around these tensions and then also educating around, without being too specific, pathways to move forward with some of them. You know, showing what these, you know, some of these compromises, and that's how we can find a better word, because I think there's this negative attachment to it, but compromises generally, I think, how communities are able to, you know, put one step in front of the other. Yeah, I think more education, trying to get as a collective get people more on board with kind of what we as a town are tasked with.
I think that really helped because everyone then is starting from common ground, they're just not starting from everyone. So we have a shared, like your PowerPoint at the very beginning of the last one kind of set up the context.
Yeah.
that we had. So could I move to number one then? The public's
That's what I
desire
was just talking
to
about,
limit
was number one.
sprawl- limit sprawl and density among strong desire to address housing emergency.
So it sounds to me like they were looking for some guidance on how you would like the public process to address the tension. And that's what I was saying, if we focus on values to push that process forward, then that could be a way to bridge those tensions.
I'd like to present that tension a little bit differently.
Oh,
So, one thing that we heard from often the same people, and I can, as a citizen, almost voice these same feelings, is we have a housing shortage. We have an affordable housing shortage. No, there's no question about that. But how we address that starts to bring up these tensions, which is density, sprawl, water usage, secondary dwelling units and backyards, all of these things that are pathways, but they bring up those tensions. And so I think that's one way that we want to, like, that's one example of these tensions where we're in agreement of where we need to go, what the problem is, but how we look at the different paths forward.
So there was a framework that I was trained in Germany about getting after something like that. And it was, you started with a grid that had 4 boxes and it said current situation, desired situation, obstacles, and first steps. So it kind of captures how you can lay out at least the way forward to something. And that might be a framework that can be used with something like this. Like, the current situation is we're really short on affordable housing. The desired situation was how do we get to more, here are the obstacles, the moratorium, the inability to be building, what are the first steps in the beginning part of the path.
And that's where we work towards trying to find agreement on those first steps that don't have to be big.
No, they don't. They don't. And it can just get people started on the path instead of like feeling like, man, we're trying to swallow the elephant here. Anything we learn on this?
I just think, it seems to be around, more based around housing and the implications. And so looking at what community rebuild programs have done and how they've done it and brought the community on board with those, that might, in the future, it might be interesting. I know Kecken and Donnie bought land here. They're real involved in that whole project. Donnie helped start it, and maybe they'd be willing to come and do a educational thing so people understand it's not going to be this ugly, weird, well, maybe it is, but we don't have to. We could do something unique and community involvement and have them, discuss the community rebuild. So here are some options. And then the gentleman working with the housing, affordable housing programs, Sean, is that his name?
Yeah.
He could talk, so maybe there could be an educational program where it kind of diffuses the
We mean
fears.
Shay and
Shay and, yeah. Where just because when people hear affordable housing, there's all kinds of perceptions. So,
Yeah, and housing's, all the housing too, not just affordable. And that, there's there's kind of housing missing at every level, in a way.
let me ask Steve if he had any thoughts on this before we move on.
No, I mean, I think one of the things is this synopsis in this first section here is something that I think finding a way of bringing that forward, especially at the next meeting because this is sort of what we're talking about, is how can we move into this next meeting with some kind of direction that makes it hopefully a little more meaningful in its results. Not that the results we got aren't meaningful. I don't mean it like that, but that allowing people to kind of think in a different way, a little bit different way, and find a means of finding solutions, and not even specific solutions, but generalized solutions to here are the important items. So, you know, offering basically the statement we've just been talking about to the community at large when we meet the next time, so that they know that yes, we're all in this boat together, you know, and we all see the problems. So to some degree, it's kind of that educational component that you were just talking about, Dave, is letting people understand the process that we're going through and help them be more a part of, or at least engage in a slightly different thought process. And I'm not exactly sure how to do that precisely, but I think it would be helpful to try and up front find a way to kind of like have things be more solution based than just answers, you know, that this is what I think needs to happen. Okay, so how do we get there? Here's what we know we want. This is what we discovered from the last time. How now can we look at that and find some goals that we can aim for, that maybe they're not all exactly the way anybody wants them, but we're all trying to aim for the same goal because it's important for everybody. I mean, and I think that's an important piece for people to recognize.
Yeah, I agree with that, Steve, because when I came to the meeting, people I didn't expect were like, I came, but this just goes on, and we've done this a million times and nothing happens. And they were very negative about the process. So I think they need to see that it isn't this huge thing that probably there's no money for and will never get done.
Yeah.
But there's the stepwise, you know, what are the most important issues? And then, you know, what are, that people can see that there's actually a plan moving forward, so they believe in it. Because what I was hearing was they don't believe in this process. It's not going to go anywhere.
Oh, we've done this so many times.
We've done it so many times and it just gets buried. And so, you know, maybe just 4 or 5 little areas, and then, you know, then really target in on some goals.
Yeah.
I think it's important to just acknowledge that even that there's some exhaustion in the process when we do that.
Right, and seeing results would be important.
Yeah.
So, anything else on 1? Should we move to 2?
Is there a way to, that we can identify kind of clear direction for us on 1?
Oh, I think, yeah, I think Dave's suggestion was a quadrant thing.
That's a good way to start.
I think they're thinking more specifics, like right now, if we limited ADUs, what would that do to affordable housing? Is that what you're doing? Okay.
I think we're looking for specifics because that's, you know, we there's a level that we'll get into with the master plan,
Right.
but I think more like you're saying, a direction on how to engage the public
Okay.
in the process.
Okay, so yeah.
And that piece around ADUs could be one of the examples that's provided as
Right.
like, what are some of the possible solutions
Sure.
that don't take us into sprawl and address housing,
Yeah.
and just giving people some ideas of what the alternatives could be. And I think with this one in particular, like it's really in the domain of the housing project.
Yeah, right.
So that's what we're trying to figure out how to best.
I would disagree with that, actually. I think it touches on both processes and not in a overlapping, doing double duty work. But I think that what we would be looking at, how this is going to impact a future land use plan.
Okay.
See, and I was thinking that too, are we talking annexation? Are we talking internal density building versus annexation? Are we talking, are we going to expand the limits of the town versus?
And that might be a really great place to get direction from the planning commission, is what is your vision around density versus annexation and how you feel the town wants to move forward? And what we should be carrying with us when we address the public. Are we talking more about density? Are we talking about?
Our system that we have and how we have all these out of town water things. Now, I'm worried about by saying something right now, I'm getting into that, here's the official.
Right, and I think that's exactly where we're at, is
Yeah.
that we have never discussed this as a committee, and I don't think that's our job
And it's really a
as a
board.
commission. Yeah, it's not our
But
job.
to lay out the question, one thing that's very much real is people that don't live inside the town feel like they don't have a voice, but they're getting water from us. So doesn't it make sense that they should be incorporated into the town? You know, but anyway.
That
it's
was one of the tensions.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'd like to add, because we did talk about the fact that it might be just a possible solution is to include those people who redraw boundaries based on that, but not and have a tiered system, because in actuality, the majority of those people who are outside of the town limits are agricultural or, you know, rural residential. And so the concern, I think, from a community standpoint is, oh my God, I don't want to be, and I've heard this from a few people, I don't want to be, you know, annexed. And in the terms of the how you go about that, it could be a tiered system where there's really no change in terms of who those people are, but they have an opportunity to have a voice here because it does impact them, you know, especially the water issues are the main thing. And that's the biggest issue overall, you know, besides not having affordable housing in general, but they go hand in hand. So, you know, I'm just kind of throwing some stuff out here in terms of what I've heard people say in regards to the idea of annexation and how would you do that? So there's two components of that, you know, and it would allow people to have more of a voice, you know, and you know, I mean, I think.
You know, if we were a home rule community, we were options, but as a statutory town, we are stuck in a lot of ways.
Well, to answer, going back, many times you've gone to brainstorming sessions. This hopefully would not be a brainstorming session. What you would say is, here's the things that came out last time. Let's discuss those more and take it to a deeper level rather than let's start with this clean slate and put stuff up again. Because that's what people are
For sure.
frustrated with.
Right.
You know, so maybe that, you know, just the way to go, what we heard last time was this, and this. Let's discuss those.
But I think goals and objectives, because that's what it's going to come down to also, is you're going to have goals and objectives. And maybe focusing toward those goals and objectives. Here are our 4 goals about this. And then there's some objectives underneath that. And, you know, we can't, as the planning commission, decide what's going to annex and what's not, but.
Yeah, more so it's similar to, I guess my question was, well, you guys are kind of answering it really. Yeah, I'm not asking you to make a definitive statement about one thing or the other. It's more, you know, how we address the question with the community, which I think is about what you're saying, values, and then getting specific about what has come out of the past conversations and educating, doing that educational component, which is just about what are we all tasked with right now, and how do we, what are some ways that we can move forward?
And then one of the questions, at least looking at, and I'm assuming you've looked at other town plans and see what are the gems that are coming out of that that are best practices that we can apply for this kind of session that would help us move the needle further. Because I'm not familiar with those. I've seen other ones. Sweet.
I'm sorry, I was just looking at what some of the other towns are doing in terms of implementing their strategic plans. And Denver has something called Groundwork Denver that was interesting. And they just picked 5 points of what, and then figured out how to address them. So, I think looking at how other towns carry out, make decisions about what's important and then how to move forward is good.
Good. Should we move to number 2? You're okay with number 1 so far? Have you got what you need? Number 2, what would be beneficial to include in regards to the connection between parking and downtown economic development?
Well, that's a big.
Yeah, I really liked actually what Suzanne said at the meeting last night about, how do we want to use, how's the downtown being used, how do we want it to be used in the future? I think that's a nice framing that addresses parking and walkability and all of it, so I liked that.
Yeah, and there are solutions. Yeah. And that other communities have used as well, that don't necessarily say if you're a store, you have to have 5 dedicated parking places for your store, you can't open your store.
Or
So,
15.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then be changes. in
Whatever.
codes and stuff, for sure.
yeah, I mean, we're going to have to change the codes and look at that, but there are ways to deal with parking that can accommodate what we want to happen downtown.
We have.
Yeah, Cal Rose is with us.
Unmute.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mayor. I am in DC this week. I had planned on this meeting being last week, so apologies. I scheduled my travel around a meeting that didn't happen. So I'm sorry I'm not there in person, and I have a lot of gratitude for Marissa and Molly for being there with you. I'm going to be here for a short time tonight, so I'm going to just reiterate my request from last night, which is once the discussion has taken place, and if you want to get us answers tonight or you want to wait on that, that's just fine. But we would like any guidance you have in writing. Even if the guidance is, we don't know, we suggest the next step is to do X. So I just want to let you all know that, because also working through this with you and being party to this really wonderful and iterative process, that these questions we are going to be looking for formal guidance on. And it doesn't have to come tonight. You don't have to have a decision or consensus tonight, but we are going to want some decision or at least direction from you in writing, so we know how to proceed with that. And if that means sitting down with us again or us coming back to another commission meeting with ideas, we're happy to do that. But just want to let you know that and really appreciate everybody's time and thoughtfulness. Thank you.
So,
This is to Cal Rose, does have a short time, and she has more of an understanding of the water and emergency service.
So the emergency services question, we're really looking, and it was great. Thank you so much, Mary, for inviting me to attend the little tabletop exercise the other week. That was super helpful. I think I sort of got a direction from that in terms of next steps for the town and how to create a formal working group of key officials across different agencies. And that's something I will bring back to you all at a later date, just given the takeaway from that meeting. That being said, if there's anything or any comments any other planning commissioners have at this point in time on that, I'd love to hear that.
well, in my experience, we haven't had much communication in that regard at all.
Well, I think as far as the board goes, we don't. I think the police department absolutely has much more communication
Yeah.
with them than the board in general.
Okay.
I mean, some of it is somewhat frustrating, like I'm in a homeowners association and been asking the fire department for over a year to come in and do an assessment about our fire readiness and how our landscaping affects our property, and they've been very hard to get a hold of and pin down.
Yeah, it seems to me that the relationship building that the representative from the state spoke about is indeed the place we will need to start in terms of reaching out formally to both our neighboring cities and counties, as well as the agencies and non-agency or volunteer partners we have within town, which includes fire. So I have some ideas there. I did speak with the woman from the state afterwards, and she was going to send me a couple of examples and connect me with some of the other smaller mountain towns and how they've addressed this issue. She has not sent that to me yet, but I hope to be able to bring that forward to you guys at a later date. If there's no other questions, I'd love to move on to water, but just want to see if there's any other questions or comments on hazard mitigation.
Sure.
No. I don't have anything else on hazard mitigation.
Okay. All right, so then in terms of water, I think we just ran into one of those in the prior discussion I was listening to, which is water availability has been a key factor in dictating growth in the town, and in Paonia, you can't separate the two. So I have seen, and thanks to the board and the mayor and Leslie and Public Works Department for all your work on the capital plan for the water system. I think that's incredible progress in this space, just to say on the side. And I plan to incorporate that and that vision behind that in the plan, as well as the vision behind watershed maintenance, because we are so reliant on springs that are ultimately fed by surface water. So we will be doing that. I think the main thing I'm looking for is, and I don't expect you to have an answer tonight, but the Arch Coal Mine site continually comes up as a roadblock in people's conversations around understanding tap limits. So any information that you all have from engineers or current studies that you have underway around that, we would love to see that to better understand where those conversations are around water taps and water supply. And also I'm looking for some legal guidance on if we have to include the Arch Coal taps legally in terms of being able to guarantee supply for those taps or not. It seems to be an outstanding question that I'm not sure about. So that's my main one for you all at this point in time.
We do have to legally include them because we are still legally obligated to serve those taps. That is our agreement with Arch Coal, and we have looked at many ways of getting out of it, and at this point, there is nothing we can do to get out of it.
Okay, and Mary, if they are to sell, what would happen then?
They would have, since those taps are attached to land, they would have to sell the land, and the taps would go with the land.
And then my understanding is they would also have to provide septic, which seems like it might be an issue for that area. Can you elaborate on that?
If they were to develop it, now they could sell the land with taps attached to it, and just the person who bought it could leave it in exactly the same situation as it is now. If they were to develop it, they would have to develop sewer as well.
Okay, and have there been any conversations, I know from the Citizen Water Committee that there were some conversations around potentially trying to put that land into a conservation easement and fundraise for conservation, and therefore put those water taps out of, just put them to bed. I'm curious just if you all have any, so something that I think want to think expansively about in this is because this particular property and those obligations are a major point of discussion, not that we need to dictate what's going to happen to them or how in the master plan, but envisioning a future with a water system that's running and envisioning a future that doesn't involve growth. I am sort of looking for some guidance on how specifically the Planning Commission would like to approach envisioning that future, and if something like conservation of the Arch Coal land might be part of that conversation or not. Again, you don't have to tell me tonight, but I think that's one of the questions I have about the water system that I wasn't able to glean answers from the current available studies.
Well, unfortunately, because it's privately held, it would be up to the coal company to do that. This is just rumor that I have heard, and from a relatively reliable source, that they were looking at that with increased I can't think of the word, there were, the tax benefits to that were very high through the end of 2022. But when that expired at the end of 2022. But that expired, they did not act on it, so I doubt that they're going to do anything with it. And I have heard nothing since the end of 2022 on this, so I don't think they're moving on it.
But at least the commissioners entertain the concept of putting it in conservation easement and
Oh,
getting it
I think
getting
it'd
it
be
off the thing. I think that would be wonderful.
wonderful idea. I was very excited when I heard
Yeah.
the hints that they were moving in that direction.
Because it's like a hangover the town has had for years.
For
It's just
years.
50 years, as a matter of fact. It's been
Yeah.
a long time.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I think we talked a little bit about this in the previous conversation, but just how or if the master plan should reference the community's desire, number 7, for greater representation within the local government process for out-of-town water users. I heard a suggestion of a tiered system. Yeah, so if there's any, we are going to seek some formal guidance on that. And I think this is an opportunity to suggest some forward areas to explore without coming down with a decision. And just to reiterate Molly's comment earlier, a lot of this is about envisioning a future and putting forward that vision, and then really using that as a reason to dive into the nitty-gritty things next. So just as number 7, should the master plan discuss or reference the community's desire for greater representation within local government processes from outside of town water users? And if so, how?
Well, again, I'll reiterate, we are a statutory town, which puts severe limits on what we can and cannot do as far as that goes. And at this point in time, there is no way to incorporate out-of-town water users into a governmental process. Now, it is up to the town. If the voters of the town wanted to change that to a home rule town, we could make different rules. But that would be up to the town to decide. So that would be an option.
There may be options as far as ordinances that talk about the membership of various committees, like especially if there's an advisory committee on water, that people from out of town are eligible to be that, people from out of town are eligible to be on a planning commission. The thing that I think rubs people the most seems to be membership on the board of trustees. That's what seems to be the question that I hear. And so, that you have to be within the town limits to do something like that.
Or voting.
Yeah.
I hear a lot from businesses and the ability to vote when you own a business in town and you live out of town. So again, statutory town.
And I know that a water board had been considered at one point. Is that something that might be considered again in the future?
Would you define water board?
I am intentionally not defining it because there's a variety of ways you could do it, or we could do it either formally or informally. I guess what I'm really looking for here is, how do we address this particular concern? And if what you're telling me is we're not quite sure, please come back to us with some recommendations. We're happy to do so.
Well, one recommendation, of course, would be annexation, because if you annex, then people are now part of the town, and they have a full voice, they can vote, and they can run for office and do all those things. The other thing that's the next tier down, of course, would be memberships on key committees that are advisory to trustees. So those would be the 2 paths forward that would at least work to alleviate some of those concerns.
Or what about a ballot, or educating people about the differences between statutory town and rural, and then looking at, does town want to vote on that, and look at changing that?
Yeah.
Because it does seem to limit us to a greater group of people.
Right.
Okay, so I've taken some notes here. Again, I'm hoping that we can get some formal direction, even if it's just, please explore this thing more. And thank you so much for commenting on those sections. And Molly, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rose.
Thanks, Colin.
I just
you.
realized you have two members of the public here too, and on any part of this discussion, did you want to kick in on comments or perspectives?
Is that appropriate?
I thought it said no comments from the public
I
on the
don't
agenda.
remember
Was that
seeing
correct?
Um,
I mean, if that's okay, I'd raise my hand and, but
Yeah.
I don't know quite yet.
No, there's no.
It was.
I don't want to ignore you.
Thank
You
you,
know,
I
and I
appreciate
want to
that.
allow you
Sure.
to say what you want to say, because this is more of an informal meeting. so.
Thank you.
I just do want to say, as far as being statutory versus home rule and letting people from outside of town serve on like the town board. To me, I feel frustrated because they don't have to pay our fees. I mean, the water system, sure,
Right.
they don't have to apply for building permits. We actually do have a rule saying that if you're on the town water system, you have to get a permit because we don't know what kind of ADUs are going in outside of town. But the thing is, nobody does because it's impossible to enforce.
Mhm.
So there's such an expansive area, I have no idea how you'd find any sort of
Figure it out.
enforcement. And I certainly don't want someone from out of town deciding my fees for me. So I think that's a really sticky wicket there. I don't, anyway, I don't know how.
There,
I think Edge went to home rule and they ended up, you have to rewrite your whole
Yeah,
code. It's very expensive. And then they ended up just using the statutory thing after all.
yeah, so what good was
So-
it? Yeah, it's just an exercise.
Yeah, but it's an interesting discussion. It's just, I think you need to really educate yourself on that
Yeah.
first.
Yeah. Steve, did you want to? kick
well, I
in?
was gonna say, one possible compromise to all of this might be that you end up allowing ad hoc out of town members to the board that don't have the ability to vote, but they can lend their voice from their perspective, in the surrounding area to help the board, because I mean, what we do here in town has a major impact on everything around it, and what people do around us has an impact on the town. So trying to find some balance between that, where you'd have, the opportunity for them to engage sitting on the board, make a commitment to that, but not being able to make final decisions or vote. I know it's kind of a weird one, but it's some kind of compromise that might include, a voice that you wouldn't normally have because they just go, well, I'm not part of town, I'm not going to show up, even though it has an impact on me.
Yeah, so kind of Washington DC's representative in the House representatives where they can't vote, but they participate.
Right, yeah, like the Virgin Islands and stuff like that, they're there and they can, put in their 2 cents into everything but they don't actually have a voice, a voting voice,
They go as far as making motions and seconding motions, but when it came time for the vote, they couldn't do that.
Right, I'm assuming so. This is just some, possibility.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, but it's an interesting idea of ad hoc members of board.
Yeah, we have to see if that would
Yeah.
be possible
Yeah.
in statutory.
Yeah.
town.
But I feel
Yeah, I
like
don't
this
know. I don't know if it's possible or not.
attention and then educating about why it is the way it is, what the
Yeah.
trade-offs are, what
Right.
some possible solutions are, and no, it's not as easy as you can have a seat on the board.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. So what question do you want to go to next?
Let's go back to that parking economic development.
Yeah.
Well, there are some potential solutions on the parking thing.
Right.
That we don't have signs up that say no overnight parking or those kind of things that would prohibit that would allow or prohibit some of the apartments or people that are, like, there's a lot of people that are employed in the town that just park downtown and that interferes with the retail stuff. So the amount of time people can be in a parking place, that's one of the things that could be looked at.
But there is also, I cannot remember what the name of it was, and I've talked to Leslie about this. Parking district, I think it was called, and they only had this at one point in time. And you pay into it, and I'm not sure the ins and outs of how this works. I don't know if you have any experience with this, Suzanne, if you've ever heard of this.
There was a parking fund, but
It is something like that, and it was done away with, and it allowed for places like the Blue Sage to have, 250 or 400 people be in the Blue Sage and not have to have a specific number of parking places associated with it.
I don't know if it went to like purchasing the spare parking places.
And maybe that's what it went for, is.
Maybe that's what it was, but it was so inconsistently enforced. I think it was really unpopular in that sense. Like some people seemed to have to pay it, and then other people, it was in the Wild West,
Yeah.
20 years ago.
Yeah, it was a long time
Yeah.
ago, yeah.
So,
That's one thing that's coming up right now is the ability of the town to enforce what we already have.
Or the ability of the town to have places like the Hearth or the Blue Sage or the place they're remodeling that used to be the Hive, to have groups of people come in there because they don't have the parking to accommodate it. So they can't get licensed for that.
it's too bad they can't make a deal like with the bank or something, the parking lot fee. But I think properties used to have to,
Yeah.
at some point in time, they had to make parking lots, but at the same time, everybody can't have a parking lot.
Yeah.
And
Well, look at the backside of Dawn's, who uses that?
yeah, but I remember a former town administrator, I think it was Jane Berry, saying that downtown parking is like, that's, as a business, that's why we have on-street parking. It's for your business downtown. It kind of comes with your business, but, I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
What about the land next to Bird Harvest? That's town.
No, that's their property. Yes, it's all their property.
The one that,
Twin Lakes.
right next to the.
Oh,
river.
Twin Lakes, that is town property.
Yeah.
And yeah, we talked about, that's been floated as a community parking lot too. It seems like my little heart would just die if that was paved over. It was just
There's a
all
song about
parking.
that.
All the red.
Yeah.
It's a compromise, it doesn't have to be the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I'd like to frame this in I think there are a lot of different ways that we can approach parking question. And I think that the tension that we're seeing is that there is a need for more parking. But there's also an inability for businesses to open and move forward and be permitted because of the lack of their ability to create parking.
Right.
And that's a problem too.
Yeah.
So we have these two things, that's the tension there. So we can identify that as a problem that we need to solve and move forward on, and start to make some little steps
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
And, so I think that just in itself becomes one of our 4 squares or whatever. And then the other thing I'm hearing is that there's the idea of trades, whether it's
Right.
across properties, night versus daytime usage. That's something I've seen of something that's got hours from 4 PM on and someplace that closes at 5.
Yeah.
There can be those trade-offs. Versus do we take empty land, which is a way to get a lot of parking quick, but there's a trade-off there too. And so thinking about, some of those priorities for how we move forward with those solutions. And I think that a parking district or fund, I've seen that work in other towns, and that's really helpful. And a couple of you have heard me describe this before. I grew up in Idaho Springs. Parking was a huge issue there. And it's something that they didn't deal with until it was a really big problem.
Yeah.
And the one thing they did have was establish that fund, and that helped them to start to deal with it piece by piece. Whether that's just paving or hiring people to help them strategize better layouts, so you can get more parking spaces, or it can be, they've demoed a couple of buildings that happen to be town property and made them parking.
Yeah.
That was more of a priority,
Has
so.
leasing been an option? Like I just think of Don's Market. What if they lease their back parking lot?
Oftentimes, I think you see that between like businesses.
Right,
almost.
right.
And I think
But I mean, that's
that,
an option. It
Yeah.
would be thrown out there.
yeah,
Right, yeah.
and that's a way to reduce that spreading the asphalt.
Yeah, exactly.
But also I think I feel like I may be crossing the line here instead of asking for your feedback, but, there's multiple, I think it'd be good to have multiple tactics to move forward with.
Right,
With something, especially something like a fund, that there are certain properties that have the real estate and are going to be required to create parking.
Yes.
And then someone who doesn't have the real estate is going to need to have an equal requirement that is paying towards a parking fund that then creates parking at a later date.
Yep.
And we identify that spot, and then the town has that
Cool.
savings.
Yeah.
I like the idea of bringing forth like other solutions that you see with other places, and that's what planners do, so.
Yeah.
There's one other option, I think, for parking is how are we using our streets as it is? Diagonal parking versus straight parking. And if you look at Main Street, especially that block of it, it's a very calm street, but it's very wide.
Yep.
And why don't we look at turning some of that into diagonal parking? So it's like looking at how we can maximize
Yeah.
the use of our streets. Of course, some people don't even want to walk 2 blocks.
I
So
know,
you've
it's a
got
busy
to
street.
try to, maybe there's an educational component there to
Yeah.
try to get people to cooperate
Yeah.
with the walkability
Right,
factor in this
Yeah.
town.
but that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And Main Street, especially since we've got businesses that have now arisen over on that corner.
Yeah.
Where the coffee shop and bike shop.
It might not be popular with all the homeowners, but it's just, you gotta
Yeah.
get used to the fact that
Yeah.
what are the options? And
Yeah.
this is town property.
And that's where zoning comes in too, like, is that zoned commercial in that area? What is the zoning?
Well,
For
you
Main
don't
Street.
have to have it commercial to be diagonal.
No, but I'm just saying, are people in a commercial
Yeah.
zone or are they not?
And then maybe you have parking signs that the town puts up, parking that direction, parking
Yes.
that
Yeah.
direction.
Yes.
So out of town people kind of have a
Knows where
yeah,
to go.
place to go.
Yeah.
And
It's not just the secret behind the town.
yeah, and then maybe
Yeah.
advertise it, to visitors or whatever, online or their iPhone or whatever.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
So I think one way to deal with that is that ends up typically, and sometimes do it themselves, I've seen that too, but you might hire a consultant
Mhm.
who can come in and kind of do a bit of mapping to define, and they also can study street widths and know where you can do what kind of parking. So that's one option. And then there's, different ways for encouraging walkability. It's, that's habit, but I think there's certain, we could do things like have a walk to work, bike to work, some sort of thing, and you have donuts on Grand Ave, I know those are kind of small things, but ways that
Yeah.
the town can kind of promote some of that activity.
More trees, more benches, things like that too. Yeah.
Now, I want to be respectful of people's time. We started at 4 and it's almost 5 now. How are people comfortable with going on for a while, another half hour or so? Getting through these?
Yeah, I think we've only got a couple, 1 or 2 more here.
Just a time check.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Can I just ask a question on the parking thing? Is there a possibility with the old tech school, whoever owns that, to lease that and do like bike share, like they do in big towns now where you pick up a bike?
It's the schools, so.
And there's a parking lot.
There's a
behind it,
lot
so-
of parking there,
Yeah,
that
yeah, that's a
possibility.
good one.
maybe they can subdivide it and the parking fund can buy the park paved area.
That's true.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because
Sell
I
a
know,
chunk.
yeah,
Already paved.
Yeah.
Before we move on, I just wanted to revisit again that framing you shared last night, Suzanne, around, you said there's so many conversations tonight that are about how we use the downtown. We need to have a plan for the downtown and like what the conversation is. Just any more ideas around how to frame that? I think you said, how are we using it now? How do we want to see it evolve? But it sounds like the parklets, and I don't know if that's exactly what you would, what Rio, Nito? It wasn't a parklet, right? But that's what, thinking about tables on the street and things like that got me thinking about that as well. So just any more ideas around how to frame that conversation?
Well, I don't know how you get, obviously the downtown building business owners and the people who use the streets. I don't know how you know, you almost have to like be specific maybe with that type of planning, so it doesn't get lost in all these other things. You know, it's like a bite-sized chunks maybe. But I don't know, you know, Cedar Edge, I think, did a downtown
Their downtown Main Street.
plan, and it kind of really made it look pretty cute from what I saw 20 years ago, you know, in comparison. So I don't know what their experience was.
I
how
think they
did
got
it.
a grant for that. And they
Yeah.
had some, and yeah, they got a plan, they got somebody come in with their grant and planned the whole thing and then carried it out with the grant.
Yeah, but kind of looking at what we have, what the desires are, and instead of getting all wild with really creative ideas, just be really practical. And I think that would appeal to people, you know, because it's very doable that way. So I don't know.
I know there's a lot that came out of the Main Street revitalization. Like that was a study also, right? Like what people wanted, what people liked, what they didn't like, and there's a lot of good information there. So I know we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and again, we can frame the conversation and say, this is what we've learned from that experiment, here are some
Yeah.
additional challenge, like things we're thinking about parking and.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like you can, obviously parking is a problem. So are you going to start removing parking from the downtown? Is that what's gonna work and appeal to people? Or do you have to say, well, this is what we have and how do we make the best of it? You know, so you're just like meat and potatoes, let's be really practical. But you know, there's this whole aesthetic component to it, like try to, if the town is letting people use the sidewalks for items, maybe there has to be a standard of maintenance, you know, it's like, or size, or, you know, it's like, so it's kind of coordinated in a way, and that way it looks good because it flows together, and it's not private property anymore, so the town can kind of decide what the aesthetic, the overall
What that
look
needs
is,
to look like.
and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know, I'm not being very helpful, but, just maybe looking at what we have, looking at kind of what we need, you know, with some of the challenges we face, and how do we make it kind of work? I don't know, I'm being very
Well, there's simple
obscure.
first steps.
Yeah, how do we like really simplify it,
Yeah.
that in a very, the most practical, basic?
Yeah. Without
because-
like this huge concrete project where you're ripping everything up.
Yeah,
starting from
yeah,
scratch.
and I mean, I don't want to be critical of the bike lanes and painting the streets, but how realistic was that? I mean, that's pretty out there for
Yeah.
this area. I mean, there are people in town that might be incredibly creative, but remember, it's people in the mesas who are coming in, and we do live in Delta County.
Right.
So how do you make it work? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think practicality
Yeah.
always is a big sell, in my
Yeah.
opinion. I don't know.
Good.
So those are just some thoughts, but I wasn't very articulate, but hopefully that's helpful.
Let's move to number 3.
I hate to just add one thing I just want to be considering is that with walkability, and this has an impact on parking and Main Street, and this is a tension, is sidewalks and paving.
Yeah.
And when you think of Main Street,
Mhm.
that's a big project and something that we would need to prepare for.
Yeah. There's some things that aren't really designated by the council, and so an option is, what's the mobility route for people? And we have this on our agenda, but what's the mobility route for people that have wheelchairs or are ambulatory challenged? How do they get downtown? You know, how do they get downtown from east to downtown? How do they get downtown from west to downtown? What is the designated routes to school? These things aren't really set. There's also a thing from the Dark Skies about, is there a route that's well lit for people that's safe? Or is there a route that's a dark skies, where if you want to see the stars, this is the street you take. If you feel safer under light, this is the street you take. So there's some designation stuff that could help. It would be pretty simple.
You said that is on your agenda, or it's not?
It is,
It is.
the
Yeah.
mobility is on the
Right.
agenda for
Mobility.
the next meeting, yeah.
How about like, cycling routes too, is that?
Yeah, and see, we haven't tackled bike routes
No,
now.
we haven't.
And that's gonna be big as far as jumbo and stuff like that, and
Right.
local recreation, how do people get there?
So the first little piece of that would be Apple Valley Jump
Right,
Route.
exactly.
So that's chunk one, but then there's the safe routes to school and the 2, 3, Fifth and Grand intersection, that's another little chunk of that for the kids driving bikes to school. So, chunks.
It's interesting to me how similar the issues of limited water and limited parking seem to work together in the midst of all of this. There's a component of it that, you know, they both have impacts in a way that have significant, I think parking's a little easier to work out and be creative with, obviously. But, you know, you have limited space, you know, I mean, short of taking down some buildings somewhere and adding, you know, parking, that's close enough for people to just walk on Main Street without having to walk more than, you know, a couple, 3 blocks. It's a challenge, you know, that's similar to having limited water resources.
I have one comment. I know Blue Sage last year had the outdoor events.
Right.
And they happened when people weren't parking so much in the city lot or the police lot there. And then they parked over on first on Main Street and walked through. But I know they're trying to make a more permanent thing, but there's a problem because of the ordinance and they have to have X amount of spaces. So maybe the piece to help economic development is looking at that little sticker point of changing that part of the ordinance.
Exactly.
Because, you know, a lot of that, when they have an evening event, a lot of the businesses downtown are closed by then. So is there really a need for parking downtown?
Yeah,
You
like,
know, Indigo Autumn closes at 6.
Right, yeah.
All the
those-
other places
yeah.
close early. What's the problem with parking on the?
Exactly, but the ordinance says you have to have X number of spaces designated. and you want to-
That's what I'm saying. You
And it's
change
not-
the ordinance.
Change the ordinance.
Can I just interject? The ordinance also says that you can have one bike rack in lieu of a parking space.
Mhm.
And I don't see a whole lot of bike racks downtown. I don't think people have really taken advantage of that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I can't remember how it's written, but it does allow you to have a bike rack.
Uh-huh.
And if you put a bike rack in, you can get rid of one space.
One requirement. for
But I don't
space.
know how many spaces they're talking, you know,
I
there's,
think it's 17.
Yeah, it's-
That's what they were.
Okay. wow, okay.
Yeah.
yeah, it's making it unrealistic
It's not
for them
realistic.
and people really go to those events.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an economic loss,
Yeah.
right?
It is.
there.
It's a big
Yeah.
thing, too.
And that's the third one, the Hive is number 1, the Hearth is number 2, and now Blue Sage is number 3.
Yeah.
It'd be really cool if you could get people to park at the high school,
Yeah.
school there.
Yeah.
And then have some sort of really
Yes.
cool cutting edge shuttle
Yeah.
thing that just keeps going around on the weekends in a
Right.
way.
Yeah.
Or just get Paonia to be known as the walking town, and then you have it like, this is how long it would take, these are all the stores, this is the calories that it would, it would be the, and then you just go through like all the downtown and then to the park and then back up to your car. And keep everybody out of your car.
But the parking fund might fund the shuttle. I mean, I don't know. Contribute to it, but
Because that also the issue of the downtown parking is also, you know, in-town parking, if you're gonna do ADUs and things like that, because it's really tight now
Yeah.
on the street to think about that.
Yeah.
And I don't know
Yeah.
how that's even gonna work.
One of the ways to improve people's walkability is make Grand Avenue a walking space. And that's just what you do. And that's what's forced to happen. That's another way of doing it. It just makes the issue go away. You gotta walk. You don't have a choice. You can't park right there. So you gotta find a parking spot. And as far as the lot near the river goes, you don't necessarily have to pave it. You could at first gravel it, which would be less expensive, and you could still make it work for cars. That's another possible. I mean, again, this is what we're looking for in terms of this meeting and where we're moving forward, is to look for those kinds of creative solutions that may be, you know, amenable to everybody and might give us some answers that make it more possible to, one, for people to be able to develop their properties and use them in a way that I know the Blue Sage is struggling with, you know, right now, and possibly, you know, I mean, because this is moving forward, this is hopefully to get other creative possibilities and ideas out there is really what we're looking for, I think.
Yeah, I was just in the Berkeley area and they have a lot of the bike shares and you just do it through Lyft. You know, it's
Oh,
very
yeah.
easy.
Yeah.
And a lot of visitors that come to town are really used to using those systems. So if there was a space like the high school and whatever, and you had the bike shares, you know, you just pick up a bike, you pay for it through Lyft, you go to town. It's the one other option from, you know, walking for people who don't want to walk. So that, you know, I think there are other town examples that really we could draw from and brainstorm with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're more creative.
So can I paraphrase what I'm hearing on this one? Sure. Which is, we need to change the ordinance, so we should propose a revisit to that. And we'd like to see a multi-tiered solution that presents several options to start to move forward. And we can kind of do that in the Foursquare essentially, but I think we've come up with a lot of great options.
This idea that Steve just said too is a really good one. Does it have to be paved? If it's can you just put gravel over the top of it, call it good for now? It doesn't tie up that property forever, but at least it meets an immediate need.
And it's probably cheaper.
Yeah.
For rebuild.
Oh, way
So
cheaper.
it's better for the trees and the water.
Yeah.
Could be a temporary
Yeah, temporary.
fix
solution.
because it's a problem already now.
And then how does the housing action plan and master plan work together? What I'm thinking, they're gonna be on a similar timeline, what you have. And I would think that they're either a chunk that's added in or an appendix or something like that. But I don't see you as having to do extra work and take their thing and incorporate it into your plan. It's like, here's the chunk on affordable housing, and it comes right out of the work that Shay's doing.
Great.
Yeah.
Shay and I had a conversation yesterday. It was essentially exactly that.
Good.
So I was reading.
Yeah, we kind of thought we'd each just reference
Yeah,
another document
perfect.
and have a simple, either for hers, we might directly it might just be an appendix, like you said. But what we were talking about is it could be a simple summary. It's just like at the same time that this exercise was performed, this was happening concurrently. Please see this document to reference.
Right, appendix F, yeah.
That's
And put the whole thing there, so everything's in one place.
Yeah.
You're not going, like, here's the general plan, but then where did I find the housing plan?
Yeah.
It's one document, right?
Yeah, okay, great. So a little bit more along the one document idea.
Yeah.
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 And we're also talking about our graphics, just so that
Sure.
those look like this, you know,
The same
same thing.
flow, yeah. Very good.
And should we frame like the parks, recreation trails, master plan the same way, like as an appendix or?
Boy, it's a huge appendix. And they've got their own.
Just cross-reference, and I heard you say earlier, like an executive summary.
You know, I've been barking about an executive summary for years. If you guys have the time to be able to take that and say, here's the chunks, that is going to be a standalone document, because there's so many issues that people have with the recommendations that were made as far as affordability and whether that's realistic for the town. And that's why one of the principles was be realistic. See Paonia for what it is,
Yeah.
not for what you think it should be. It's for what it is, you know, and what's realistic for us to be able to do. You know, we've said some of that as far as the parking right now. It's like, what's realistic for us to try to tackle this parking stuff instead of like this giant, always looking at grants, always looking at the outside, or there simple things our community can do that would
Yeah,
bring it about.
I was gonna say this till the end, but it feels like a good segue. I think a theme that I'm hearing, and I heard last night too, is like, where are the opportunities for more, I think, user fees, like funds that can help address some of the infrastructure issues, right? So if it only costs $15 to use the sidewalk for
A table.
dining, that's an option, and that could maybe help with other sidewalk issues, because we know sidewalks are a big issue, right? And then like the trees related to the sidewalks, and then I heard the parking fund too, so thinking about, yeah, realistic ways to pay for
Yeah.
some things, it feels like this theme of user fees that can support some additional revenue to take care of infrastructure is important.
We haven't captured much the traffic. I mean, one thing I'm realizing on 133 closure is how much our businesses are dependent on this flow through traffic on
Yes.
133. It's just hammering them right now. And as you're living here for 20 years, I guess I just haven't really noticed how much it's built up and how critical it is. As a town, we're not capturing the tax base on that.
Oh, my gosh.
With a lodging fee or whatever else, the other fees that, so our own citizens don't have to pay those fees.
Yeah,
But the citizens also indirectly or directly benefit from those things, because we don't.
I should have said, these are fees that don't burden the local residents, which I think is one thing that came out of the last
Yeah.
session too, related to the Parks and Rec
Yeah.
stuff.
Let's see what's next here. Actually, I think we're,
We have one in particular with regards to housing and development, do you want to be sure is included in the master plan, which I think is maybe just a good wrap-up question of, I think there's housing, but I think there's also kind of this land use,
Yes.
which I think is a goal for us is to have a, diagrammatic future land use plan that can address some of these things like, downtown beautification to density in certain zones to commercial growth. Speaking of, lodging, where do we want a lodging area for more lodging? These kinds of things that we can include. And that's kind of in my section, the growth framework. So are there some kind of directions on things you want us to be sure we're addressing with the community?
I know things have come up in the past, like there was a guy who was interested in putting an RV park out at the end of Stall Road. And, I mean, there was some question about the sewer system, but he understood everything that he would have to do with the sewer that came off of those RVs before it could go into our sewer system. So he understood that pre-treat it all. But something like that, where, and again, we could annex out Stall Road and capture that. And we want to get the sewer line out to Stockinton because their sewer system is failing and they want us to go out that direction. So if we could, there's another thing, there would be revenue coming from, if we could annex Stockinton, then we would get a lot of tax revenue from Stockinton.
So it sounds like the Samuel Wade stall
Yeah, that
area.
would be a commercial corridor that we could get that would bring us revenues. And it would be a good way, that would be a business corridor too, that could work.
And that corridor over the Grand Ave, which to me, which seems more like a safety and school zone. And kind of having those have two separate dynamics. I'm kind of putting words in your mouth, so I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
no, I'm good with it.
Yeah, because we had talked about, there was another idea, a crazy idea that was floated for a while, that a land trade with dependable lumber and the town, where the town would get dependable lumber and then dependable lumber would get the Twin Lakes thing, and then they would move out there and then the town would take over the dependable lumber site. And again, there would be commercial out that direction too. So there's kind of this idea that Samuel Wade would be a commercial corridor.
Right, and what about, also, if there's commercial growth, but also maintaining Grand Ave's.
That's the question. That's the tension that happens with that kind of proposal.
Right.
Because are there things that are being proposed or brought in on that corridor coming in that would stop the traffic from going to Grand? So for instance, where there was a big fight about.
Oh, the dollar store.
The dollar store out there, and what that would have done to downtown, and what that would have done.
Right.
Ace Drugs, Ace Drugs, now.
Unfortunately, yeah.
But if the type of business, like you
Yeah,
just
exactly.
mentioned, dependable lumber, that's people go there for that. And it actually, that parking is very dangerous there. I've had incidences where close calls. And so, a trade-off that's not impacting.
Yeah.
downtown.
Or like, put an RV park out there. That would actually bring business into town instead of drawing business away from town. And it would be really beneficial for the festivals and things like that. So
If it was
you know,
done well.
Yeah,
That's
it's
not
not
a-
It's also,
Yeah.
it's also a scenic byway then.
Yes.
And that was the
exactly.
contention and the godsend also, because we do not have a dollar store there,
Yeah.
which would be
Exactly.
a horror
Yeah.
right now aesthetically and to the town, because there's not many towns that have this sweet appeal that Paonia does
Yeah.
because of this very reason. People pull in here and it's like, the 1940s in the best way.
Yeah.
And people love that. They want to keep that.
We
Yeah.
don't have this giant highway running through the middle of our town that's a through. That's
That's
the
good.
Yes.
When you have to pass through all this industrial
Right.
sprawl to get to
Right.
towns, there's so many
exactly.
towns like that, and it's
Yeah,
so
exactly.
ugly.
Yeah.
And that's what I think
exactly.
is the charming piece about where we
Absolutely.
live,
And
that you
that's-
have to get off the highway and go into this quaint little downtown. And it really, you're really close.
Yeah.
I'd like to piggyback a question off of that. So some master plans also define aesthetic and, having a design guidelines is a whole other document, that would be a part of a design review, it's a whole other thing. But within the master plan, we can create some guidance around aesthetic. It could be something that's like that corridor coming in, that while it might become more commercial, there are certain aesthetics that we'd like to preserve. It could be about density and lot coverage, it could be about scale of building, there can be these kinds of things that don't have to get too detailed, but can start to define, we want to maintain certain view corridors, so, these kinds of things are part of it, or it's how we talk about other more downtown areas as well, that could just be, maintaining an easy one, maintaining trees, maintaining treescape. Or it could be scale, in this zone, we don't want anything over a 2-story, but in this zone, we think it's appropriate for a 3-story. So I guess my question is, does the commission feel that the master plan and the growth framework should include some aesthetic guidance?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Steve, you on board with that?
That's a tough one. I don't necessarily disagree with it. As far as aesthetics go, you guys know, I love stuff that's unique and interesting and creative. We have a lot of people in this town that would be an incredible opportunity to maintain and express the creativity that is an inherent component of our community. How you define that is the one that's the hesitancy. How it actually gets defined is the toughest thing, because that aesthetic is a very subjective term. Although I agree with Molly what she's saying, I think how do you get that in a guideline that is really transposable into reality? I'm not quite sure about that, but I agree with it. I'm just not quite sure how you do it, is all.
It could be part of an ordinance, so like Santa Fe has, anything that's developed has to fit into the design concept of the town. And then, so if we're talking about that corridor, that it's actually regulated, so you can't just put anything up, that there's.
Well, so then what that would mean, I guess, I'm sorry, I'm jumping in here, but what that would mean is having a committee or a board that oversees that. You know what I mean? You'd have to establish some means of maintaining that or creating that aesthetic and maintaining it,
I'd like to just comment on that, Steve, that in other communities, it's often this board. It's often
That's
the
what I was
planning.
thinking.
Right. Yeah, but somebody has to oversee it, I think.
And that actually, that's a really important role of the planning commission. And I think that the important part of it is that, and what could be a part of our, action or, objectives is that the town should consider and this is another process, but a design guidelines. It can just be a recommendation that can happen 5 years down the road. We also have our aesthetic guidelines within the growth framework. But to codify that, doing a design guideline that then you define how strict or how lenient you want that to be. It could be that a common one I see, especially in a corridor like that, is, you have to break the face of a building every 30 feet or something like that, that keeps you from having the giant mega warehouse. Yeah, and so that's just an example of some ways that you can have a few items in place to start to help that character.
So there is a kind of an aesthetic component in our current plan, kind of like that, but they're talking about the Highway 133 overlay typically. I'm looking at the comprehensive plan for Ashland, Oregon, and they kind of put aesthetics with park, open space, and aesthetics. And so it looks like they're kind of making the aesthetics more to do with open space and green areas. So the street trees is an aesthetic that I think people really appreciate here. So again, look at what things that are pretty universally considered aesthetic here. But I liked what Molly said when she was talking about the density and perhaps limiting the height. Because I think, people move here and they want a garden. Your backyard is kind of a garden space. And there's probably nothing more heartbreaking than to lose your sunlight, because we just allowed for a huge, we didn't move to New York City when we came here, we moved to the country. And so there's a sustainability element there that, sustainability in our master plan.
Yeah, and that is a wonderful word, Suzanne.
Yeah. I was trying to find Ashland's. They had a great sustainability thing at one time, and it looks like they've rewritten things and I can't find it. But they are chickens and animal ordinances. It's all in the nuisance ordinances. And some towns put it in the master plan, because if you want to have a goat in your yard, technically you can't get a variance if it's a nuisance ordinance, but you can if animals are in the zoning ordinances, then that's the place that we can have variances. So, that could be with land use. And I mean, I don't want to go overboard legislating chickens and stuff, but at the same time, it's like, where are things in our code right now might not be better? That's sustainability. That's being able to use your land to feed yourself. And I don't know if that's appealing to people who
But that
live
is
here
an
or not.
aesthetic here. I mean, a lot of people.
And that's an aesthetic too.
It's
Yeah.
huge. You get a situation
Yeah.
on one of our streets here where someone threw up a building that blocked all the sunlight to that person's backyard. And it was heartbreaking for them, but it met all the codes, it met all that. So like, for
Yeah.
instance, our HOA has covenant restrictions against blocking people's
Yeah.
views of mountains. Those kind of
And
things.
some of that has to do with the design of the building. Like if it's a big tall box that's 25 feet or even
Yeah.
18 feet,
Yeah.
it's gonna block a lot more than if you have a peaked roof, because that puts, the sunlight can flow over it. So our code doesn't, if you look at the diagrams in our code of building heights, it's
Yeah.
like these big tall boxes basically. So we must.
Well, from a contractor's perspective, the reality is that we have very small lots in
Yes.
general. And so you start building houses that are, exceptionally tall comparatively to the lot, then all of a sudden that shadow becomes a really important thing. I know, in the Front Range in Boulder and places like that, they have all kinds of ordinances about the impact of, and it has more to do with solar than it does with, growing. But here, it's growing stuff is more critical. So, but because lots are so small, the impacts are greater because you don't have a whole lot of room between buildings. So that's something to consider in the midst of that.
But yeah, I think sustainability is something huge that we should
There's
read through the
aesthetic.
whole master plan.
It's not too much. make him more.
Did you get what you needed from us? Are there other pieces?
Yeah, a lot of great information.
Yeah, did you wanna, return it all to the next little areas, or you feel like that was covered?
I think that was covered. I think I'd go back to what Cal Rose requested, that I think what we would need is I think she's more the expert on this, that what we're asking for is for the commission to kind of define some in writing what the request is. So we've taken notes. Help me if I'm not speaking right about what her request was.
Yeah, I'm confused about what that is.
Well, there's a piece just around getting written requests in general.
Oh,
So, I
yeah.
mean, like what we talked about last night, instead of more informal things. That's part of the direction we were trying to go tonight, but also I hear you say like, some of this is not the job of the planning commission. I think Cal Rose maybe had some specific requests with her topics that she's working on, like the water and infrastructure. And we'll have her email you if she needs something in writing about that.
Why don't we do that? We've got some notes. I've tried to kind of ask for that in our conversation, is like, can we define how we're answering this question? And if we feel like we need any clarity.
Yeah,
we would
we'll do it over email.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay.
There's two different aspects here. One, you're asking for general community input, and like how that impacts, like what we've been trying to do today. But there's a second piece about how the planning process itself is being managed.
Mm-hmm.
The questions that are more like board level stuff. And so the board has asked Mary and I to be that interface for your group. And so I know with the housing thing, Paige and I are pretty active with Andrew and Shay about sitting down and kind of going over, like before we have a meeting or something like that. Not huge hour meetings or hour and a half meetings, but 20 minutes, check-ins, even by phone, stuff like that. So that's the thing where if that's what she's asking for, Mary and I are available to do that.
Right.
You know, we're committed to do that so that it helps you be clear and moving forward. But this request, it seems cumbersome that everything we want, we have to put in writing.
Well,
That's what's kind of hard.
I think that piece is important to Cal Rose.
I think it's also important to, and I'm loose and informal a lot in how I communicate. And I think that because of leading this process to have kind of some clear steps moving forward and make sure that we're operating as your representatives in a lot of ways out to the community, and that we are guiding this in the right way. And that's what this conversation was a lot about. I think we just want to make sure that we've heard you clearly.
Yeah.
Because we've been taking notes, and it'll be through our filter. And so I think that that's why Cal Rose is seeing the need for written direction from your side of it, so that we are clear that we heard you correctly.
Well, what'll happen with this meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, there's minutes that'll come out of this? Yeah. We didn't make formal motions though, so that's what.
No, and the minutes are pretty sketchy. I mean, the minutes aren't gonna be in-depth on any of this stuff.
Careful.
I'm not sketchy. No, sketchy is not, a derogatory term here. I mean, it's not gonna be in-depth the way that they're taking.
No, not quite.
No.
But it will cover the topics. I don't just do action minutes. I
Right.
do try and capture the
Right.
high points.
But maybe could you write up what you think you heard and run it past Dave and,
I
Yeah,
think,
Dave,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, that is the thing is we can do the reality check
yeah.
for when you.
let's do that. Yeah.
That sounds good.
Okay.
I feel like we got, for most of them, clear direction around what's important.
Yeah, again, I think the piece around like formal requests and writing is we're receiving a lot of input from different places and people and trying to respond to it. And that was kind of what our agenda item was about last night. Like, how do we do this in a good way without, we want to do the best job we can. We want it to work for everyone. We want to incorporate everyone's feedback, and it's kind of pushing us to do a lot more work than we had originally planned. So how do we manage that? And again, making sure what we're really being asked to do is communicate it in writing rather than, in an informal way where we feel like we need to try to respond to
I'd also,
incorporate it.
yeah, I'm sorry to jump in there, but just to key off of what you're saying, we're also a big group.
Mhm.
I was gonna say, that you're not two people.
Right, and so we just spent a week trying to schedule one meeting.
Yeah.
For all five of us to be present,
Right.
and we couldn't do it. You know, if we weren't able to do it in the time frame that we wanted to. And so I think like some periodic check-ins, I think all of us would appreciate that, but we'll have to do that in a way that's not probably the whole group. It might have to be directed for topic and who's managing that in ways that we can check in and, you know.
That's the no surprises principle, because basically what happens is you have your group, I'll use the planning commission. So you have all these experiences as you're going along. And we as planning and citizens and trustees have all these, and if there isn't this back and forth check-in you're talking about, then surprises happen.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, we didn't expect that, or we didn't expect this.
And I think that's where that desire for things in writing, so that Marissa and I are clear on what we talked about today,
Yeah,
you know, but that could get lost in translation
right.
back to Cal Rose and Scott and Laura.
Right. And that was supposed to be the purpose of the board updates that were happening once a month, that once a month there's a written thing. Unfortunately, what I don't see is the attention of the board being actually given to that report and discussion about it. Like it was in last night's agenda, and it really wasn't focused on, here's what the planning efforts are. It was just mentioned, here's the upcoming meetings, and that was about it. But it wasn't really saying, here's the outcomes, here's what we try to do, here's some of the decisions we're trying to make, so that they aren't surprised.
On that note, I would love for you all to help bring people to the event on the 24th.
Oh, sure.
And I wanted to respond to what you said, Lynn, about folks feeling like the process was maybe too superficial. That's the word I was saying. That wasn't exactly what you said, but like, we've been through this before, getting a lot of ideas and it doesn't go anywhere. And I put this funnel graphic in the presentation I gave. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but like, the first session is gonna be more big picture, superficial, lots of ideas, lots of information. We're gonna keep narrowing and going deeper. And so if you can let people know, if you've had conversations with folks who were like, I don't wanna do this like sticky note, big ideas thing, it is going deeper and building on what we did last time. And yeah, would love to get those folks in the process.
I think, you know, what I communicated to them is this is a local group that understands local issues and what happened in the past. And so give them a chance to go through a process that's different, looks a little bit different. And they said they did.
You don't change minds.
Yeah.
You change minds by behaviors. So if they're walking in the room and they're not voting with dots and they're not throwing up a bunch of sticky notes, that's a big change.
Right.
They're having in-depth discussions, and then the moderator is coming back and saying, this is what our group came up with. And these are the 1, 2, 3s, and 4s, rather than what we get is this, it's a brain map.
Yeah.
Is what a lot of things that come out of it. And I think people are kind of tired of that. They like to see outcomes.
Yeah,
That
and
was-
there's two halves.
I see what you're talking about.
Yeah.
when you're
Yeah.
you've done it.
So the morning session is focused on vision, which is gonna be a little more creative process. The afternoon session is where we're gonna have those conversations about the key tensions. And people can come to either or both. We are doing this longer session because it's modeled after the strategy session you all did last summer.
Yeah.
That went well, even though it was 5 hours on a Saturday, which is what we're attempting. We'll see, but I want people to have the options so they don't have to give up their whole day. So like those folks might want to come to the afternoon portion where we're really working on the tough questions.
The sticky note thing did not work for them.
Well, there's no
They're like, we've
sticky
done
notes
this so many.
time, but I mean, I myself have a hard time doing like visioning stuff because I've done it. So like, I want to get to the nitty gritty,
Yeah.
but we have to have a vision too.
Yeah.
Cool.
Anything
Okay, thank
else?
you all.
I just have one quick question, and your guidance, that approach of making kind of be a guidance document, because Leslie and we're in transition to a new administrator, is saying that we have to rewrite our comprehensive plan because it's a mess and Nick's looking at it. And so, yeah, the zoning code, I'm sorry, the land use code. And so, like, the ideas that might come out of this, it's like, what's the process at that point? Does this group hand it to the planning commission and then you work with the new administrator to figure out how to incorporate the changes that might impact the zoning ordinances? You know what I mean, the land use ordinances. I was just kind of wondering, since there's this whole, like, having to look at Leslie and Nick is talking about, how does that come to play? How does that integrate with, or can it, or is this separate?
Well, my understanding of this,
Yeah.
Suzanne, and it's just my understanding of that, is that there's so much, there's loopholes and there's big empty spaces and there's just conflicting stuff. Is all they're trying to do is
Is
get
to
all that sorted out
Okay,
and make sure that it's consistent
okay,
and it's clear and the big empty spaces are filled in.
okay.
And that's all they're doing. They're
So it's
just-
almost codified in itself. So then when you come up with a new idea, you're like, oh, bingo, this is exactly what we need to change right here. And it's not
Yes.
all spread out, that kind of
Yes,
thing. Okay.
exactly, so that we have a document that isn't just a jumbled together.
Yeah, so it's easier to look
Yes.
at it in the future and take some of the recommendations and.
Yeah.
Take out the inconsistencies,
Yeah.
take out the things that kind of fight against each other, so.
Yeah,
In law enforcement, for instance, when they're trying to do code enforcement, they've also been stopped in their tracks by the verbiage of some of the code. Like, we just can't get past this point because this part of the code says this and this part of the code says
Right.
that. So how do we enforce it?
yeah.
Right.
So it's those kind of things that are getting.
Yeah, and the land use stuff, I mean, how much stuff do we need on cul-de-sacs when we have one?
Yeah.
Well, should we wrap it up? Are we good?
Yeah.
All right.
We're gonna sing Kumbaya or something?
If that's how we feel, I'd say that's how we're gonna start the meeting.
Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, maybe we need, set
You
up.
know, we should make Second Street the bike path because it's so wide and you don't feel like you can park on it. I was told that your car would probably be hit by some